Hello and welcome to the SprocketPod, your place for all things helpful HubSpot content. For those of you who don't know us, my name is Cameron Collins. I am a revenue operations strategist with RevPartners. I also serve as community manager with Sprocketeer. We've got my amazing co-host Mark Lerner here. Mark, take it away.
Mark Lerner, Director of Growth Marketing at DealHub. We are a agile, flexible CPQ solution, integrate natively with all the major CRM ecosystems, including HubSpot.
We have our guest Danielle Urban here with us today as we talk about custom objects. More on that in a minute. But Danielle, go ahead and say hey.
Hey, I'm so happy to be here. I am an independent consultant. I work with B2B software companies who are looking to optimize and understand their data in and through HubSpot. I've been playing around in HubSpot since 2011, 12, 13, somewhere in there.
And HubSpot's, I have been a frequent user of HubSpot for the past 2 to 3 years, and it's changed a lot. So I'm sure that you've
Yeah.
seen so much evolution.
Yeah, lots of acquisitions that turn into the HubSpot core platform. It's been fun to see how they've gone from basically just white labeling an acquisition to now the Clearbit acquisition is you don't even know it's Clearbit anymore. There used to be like performable links still in HubSpot.
Yeah.
And obviously, we'll be talking about custom objects, but as many know, HubSpot started as a marketing platform. And I can imagine at the time there were probably contacts and emails, but I would have to imagine that in the early days, like objects weren't really a thing back then, right?
No, we had a Salesforce admin because it was HubSpot and Salesforce. You really couldn't have HubSpot as a standalone. But I remember, I think it was either 2013 or 2014, they announced CRM. And I was working for a time at the company that had been acquired by HP. And so as that acquisition unfolded and moved forward, right when they were announcing CRM is when they told us they were better integrating our systems, which really just meant they were killing off everything that we had access to. So I was sitting there listening to all these announcements, just pouting in the audience.
It's crazy how much HubSpot has grown, and yet they have been built on the philosophy of all on one system, not all in one system. And so it's interesting
Right.
as they continue to toe that line where they continue to grow and do more, but they still play well with third party apps and other
Yeah.
programs and systems as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, of course, you can't build a CRM without understanding how it works and contacts, companies, deals. Those are the foundational object, if you will. Some might argue line items fit in there, and now we have some new ones, which we'll be talking about. But before we really dive in, I know that there are a wide variety of HubSpot users who listen to our show, and some may not really be familiar with what exactly an object is, let alone what a custom object is. So let's start at the top and do a bit of a breakdown of what objects are and how they play into a CRM.
Definitely. This is actually where I've started working with some of my clients because when they bring in new employees and they've never seen HubSpot before, they're like, can you send me some courses, some links, things I should look at? And I usually open the data model that we now have that beautiful view of and start to talk through that to explain that each of these things that you see, each of these little boxes that are in front of you in the data model are what we call an object. And the data model is great because when you hover over any of those boxes, you can see what else they connect to. That is a really excellent visual representation of associations. So really the way that our CRM comes together is you have objects like contacts, companies, deals, line items, and HubSpot's moving towards calling more things objects and treating more things like objects. For example, forms, I've been really loud about in my opinions on how forms should be handled and reported on in HubSpot. And now we have the user object, and we've got lots of other things coming out, especially for the front-facing management of things. The user is really internal, but unlocks a lot of flexibility with what you can do in the platform when you have the people who log in to use HubSpot as a thing you can report on, work with, customize, whatever it may be. So really getting to the foundational understanding of what is an object. It is the thing that you are labeling within HubSpot and how they connect together. That's going to get you so far ahead in understanding how the entire platform works.
That is so well said. I know when I first started wrapping my head around it, I would log into HubSpot as a new user back in the early days, and I would look at a blank CRM and I'd look at it like a canvas,
Mhm.
and I'd be like, cool, every business needs contacts, companies, and deals. And it's like all
Mhm.
of a sudden trying to fit everything into being a contact company or deal. And now we have the notion of custom objects, which, I mean, really, if we take a few steps back, your CRM is just a way to represent real world data. And
Hmm.
so the object is a bucket. It's the biggest bucket where you then have records, right? So a contact is a contact, but then the person is the record. And then you have properties and then values in those properties. So it all
Exactly.
builds on one another.
It's interesting too, because as I was just explaining that, I heard myself saying it's a label that you can put on something, but we have to be so careful with our vocabulary because HubSpot does also have labels that are a different thing that you can apply to objects. Beyond the word object, it's difficult to explain it without bleeding into other things. So you're right, where we have objects and then we have records within that object. So you have that umbrella thing that you create, that is your object. And then you've got all the records inside that might be contacts, and each contact record is a name, an email address. We all know HubSpot default dedupes against email. And so you'll get all these email addresses and whatever else information. Isn't the standard HubSpot property set now like 200 and something properties per record
Oh, yeah.
for
And,
contacts?
and I don't know if it's semantic or maybe it isn't, but it opens the question of what is a legitimate object versus a pseudo object, because
Mm,
line items oftentimes become a focal point of this conversation where they should be objects, but they're not really objects, but
right.
they get treated like them. So, for those who are trying to understand data architecture, and again, I don't know if this is maybe philosophical, but what is the difference between a legitimate object versus something that shouldn't really be an object? Like maybe line items.
Yeah, I think only the HubSpot product team could really answer that. And the roadmap too, like we've seen with users becoming an object, who knows where we're going to end up once everything looks like an object or is an actual object. We've had so much come out lately. And I'm coming back to custom objects. I'm not even sure when that got released. I think it's only been in recent years that I've had access to enterprise portals to even start playing with custom objects, but I'm sure they've been around a while because there are so many different ways that you can customize HubSpot. But I don't know what the history is there. Do you? Somebody Google
I'm
it.
not. Yeah, I know. We'll have to get it pulled up here. And while we look into when custom objects became a thing, it's an interesting thing that you mentioned having enterprise access, because
Mhm.
I think I often take for granted the portals that I do have access
Yeah.
to, which are enterprise and do have access to custom objects. And really, to that point, I don't like oftentimes dwelling on the things that people do wrong, but I think it's important to consider when custom objects should or shouldn't be used. What's your
Yes.
take on when it's appropriate to implement a custom object?
Oh, it's so hard to say. I think it really depends on your business model. Like I said, I primarily work in B2B SaaS companies. So it's usually pretty straightforward, but I've had B2B SaaS companies that also have a hardware component. I have one client who sells a point of sale system. And so they have this software that they have to set up, and you're subscribing to the software that makes the thing run. But at the end of the day, you can't do it without the hardware. And so they have created lots of custom objects. We went a little nuts as soon as we unlocked that enterprise tier. And we've had to since dial it back and make sure that we think strategically about what makes the most sense. So we've kept in place a hardware object, which allows us to track like serial numbers and link that to the company that has the hardware, especially if they have a customer that has multiple locations. Then we can have parent companies, sub companies, and have the hardware associated to the actual location that it is. It makes it really easy for their support team to understand what is their cellular connection ability with this device that they have. Oh, they have an old one. Maybe that's why it's not working. Let's just ship them a new one. And so having that object be a separate thing that we can see as it's related to the other objects that are in the CRM really fundamentally makes their business easier to run because they've created the structure for what suits them. They've also created a custom object called feature requests and are trying to manage that feedback loop. We're debating if we really want to keep that one or move that somewhere else, allowing their support team, or I don't think they have an externally facing form yet for feature requests. It's primarily internal, which is why we can even have the debate of can we quickly reverse course on this or look at other tools to get that done. But I think in assessing what should or should not be it's the kind of thing where it can get out of hand so quickly. You need to think very strategically about how all these pieces fit together and exhaust your resources in the HubSpot the portals that are handed to you. Like when you first sign up with HubSpot, it comes with a lot. And as we're going to talk about later, we have the new object library. HubSpot builds a lot of things under the hood to make it easier to use the things they built for you. So I've even had customers talk to me and say, can we create like a contract object, which in some cases might make sense. But for them, I was like, why is that not deals? So it's exciting to think really big and customized. But at the end of the day, you need to make sure that it makes sense for your processes and for the way that HubSpot should function out of the box.
And I think you mentioned probably one of the most important statements that anyone can make when it comes to building an instance. It depends.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The reality is it's not one size fits all. Not everything is a contact company or deal, but not every deal can go without having an invoice that doesn't exist as a custom object. And so all of that is to say that depending on the business and the use case, custom objects are a really powerful tool.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there's definitely a lot of tips and tricks and best practices, which we'll continue to dissect throughout this conversation. But I know for me, one of the mistakes that I made early on in setting up custom objects, which if you haven't played with this tool yet, then you're about to learn something fun. They don't automatically associate to existing objects or other existing objects. So if you go in and let's say you're setting up a business for real estate and you want a custom object for houses and homes to hold like a property information, well, you create a custom object for houses and homes, but that doesn't automatically associate to contacts or companies or anything else. And so you have to go into your settings and actually go through the process of setting that up. For
I
those
got that reminder yesterday as I was mocking up a demo for a client. I was like, oh, it's not going to show up. In further down from that, even you need to customize your record views to make sure that you can see the thing once you do get it associated.
So let's talk a little bit about that because I know that this is something that not only have I run into, but we've seen it a few times in Sprocketeer where somebody goes and they set up a custom object and then I like, why isn't it coming up in the filters or the views or like, it doesn't seem like it really exists.
Mhm.
Just go to your settings and plug it in, or do you have any specific tips on going through that process, setting it
Yeah,
up?
our favorite answer, it depends. It depends what you're setting up. Because in the example of hardware associated to companies, we want to see a lot of detail about that hardware. And it's not very useful to have even just the associated cards where you're limited to the name and 3 properties. We obviously set that up and customize it once we create the association. So you create the custom object, create all of your properties within that custom object, maybe create a few records, and then go back and create the association so that you know how it should be associated to the other objects in your portal. So then you have to make sure you can go see it. And there are 2 places that you can customize it. You can customize the card, the association card for, I think that setting is in the custom object itself, because that's how it appears on all the other records that it's associated to in the right sidebar. And I could go on an hour-long tangent about record customization because I love it so much. And we have new options that I haven't been able to talk about anywhere yet, but that's coming. And so you can customize that card and how it appears in the right side column, but then also you can customize that sort of window that slides in when you click the preview button, which that's new and I'm very excited about that. But then in terms of mapping that to your business process and who needs to see this information and how, you get a lot more real estate if you are able to drop that into the center column of a record and create that association table. So in the example of hardware, if their customer service agents get a ticket and something isn't working, then they can go in and see on that company very quickly what hardware they have in place, where it is, what model it is, because we've specifically created that table to serve that need for them in the center column.
HubSpot has become so powerful. Of course, custom objects have had a lot of development over the past 12 months and 200 plus product releases
Yeah.
through HubSpot. So a
Yes.
lot of things have had a lot of development. But I think it's interesting where being able to create a custom object is not in and of itself something that's particularly new. Again, we have to pull up when
Right.
that feature became available, but even 6 months ago, you had to go through a more complicated process. Getting things updated on custom objects was oftentimes more difficult, and there was a lot less ease to the process. Whereas now I feel like there's a lot more that's drag and drop. And an example would be setting up that middle association record where there was a time when there was a whole hug on it. And now you can go read the knowledge base article. And I think most people could probably set up a card quite easily and quite quickly now, just because they've made the usability so much more easy.
I think that was only released at Inbound last year because I remember taking notes and excitedly slacking my client and saying, let's go change all your center columns.
The amount of happenings at Inbound, which let's talk a little bit about that, because I know there's been a lot of releases, a lot of updates, not all, of course, related to custom objects, but what were some of the tie-ins either to custom objects or customizability of platform that you have both been seeing and hearing about as a result Inbound over the past week?
Ooh, yeah. So the thing I'm most excited about is the app cards that have that sort of like interactive aspect, because last year they announced the ability to create custom cards using the React components. I don't know how to write React yet. It's on my list. And so that felt like a huge hurdle for me to actually be able to make use of that new announcement and that new feature. Obviously, the customizability out of the box was incredible. And I've since done a lot of customization for my clients. I have this workshop model where I sit down with their heads of CS, heads of sales, and heads of marketing and say, let's build this thing in an hour. We're just going to talk about what needs to happen when one of your team members lands on the screen. We're going to make it like super custom to them and what they need to accomplish. And even in the last few months, it went from being 3 separate customization experiences to that single unified customization experience. And I think that might even still be in beta, but it's amazing. Like you actually get to see everything all in one view while you're editing it. And so that came out last year, but this year, in the app marketplace, many of the platforms that integrate with HubSpot, like Sendoso and Amplitude, can now just drop in their own user experience within HubSpot. And that's incredible because we know that you could do that in a custom dev environment or have a dev build that for you. But now we've unlocked that for users like me who have a good technical understanding, but can't quite get past learning the languages to make it happen. And so now it means that you get to keep people in HubSpot, which really creates stickiness, which creates better data. It just keeps everybody working together in a much more cohesive way. So that is one of the things I'm really excited about. And I know we had on our agenda to talk a little bit later about app object, but we can dive into that now if you're ready, because it's basically an extension of that.
Do it.
One thing on the cards, I think DealHub was like a design partner on the initial beta for that.
Amazing.
And it's interesting because it went under the radar. I think HubSpot really wanted that to be part of the story, but most people at Inbound release focused on Breeze and agents and all this.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's very cool. I got to sit in on a call with the HubSpot team as an observer about the release of this, and it's super exciting. And I think it really speaks to HubSpot's desire to build an ecosystem for integration partners that enables the integration to be have that native feeling within the product and not be a walled garden in a way. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, I got to see some of the demos I went to the new Sales Hub deep dive session at Inbound, and they showed off Sendoso's like tab that you can add. And that was, like you're saying, there wasn't a whole lot of buzz around it. The focus really was on Breeze, which was justified. But still, it was those little things that make HubSpot more usable in the everyday. And it's really cool to see that come together and for app developers to have that functionality. Like you're saying, we're really moving into a space where HubSpot is welcoming and opening up that ecosystem. And I'm like biting my tongue on this app objects thing because it's so cool. And I think another example of them opening that up is these app objects. So I have not heard much about it and haven't seen much written about it. And I am not an official partner. I'm a solutions provider, lower level here. But I have heard at Partner Day, there was a lot of buzz around this. And they've released the option to have apps create custom objects regardless of subscription level. So if you're creating an app that is dependent on custom objects until today or until whenever they release this officially, you haven't been able to sell to anyone other than enterprise. And they have to have the headroom in their custom objects because there's a limit on how many you can create to be able to implement that app. or you have to find another way to accomplish the same thing that a custom object would through your app function. So by HubSpot allowing apps to create custom objects in any portal, that is so cool. Like now everybody can create an app and can create something that functions natively in HubSpot in a really sleek and streamlined way that fits the data model, that helps people get onboarded easier because they understand how the objects associate to each other. I just can't wait to hear more about that and see what comes next, because I think that opens up a lot of innovation opportunity.
I wonder if that applies to custom apps in their dev. I forgot how they call it, but you can build your own internal custom applications.
The
Does that
private
mean
app.
you can do a workaround of object limitations if you just do it that way?
We won't talk more about that. We're just going to keep that on the
Yeah.
down low. We'll test that later.
I think it's so cool, especially because I could see a lot of examples where one use case could be DealHub automatically creating invoices on an invoice object. So a notorious problem for companies using HubSpot is being able to calculate net revenue retention. What is your active recurring revenue balance at any given time? And unless all of your payments that you're ever receiving and what your active revenue balance is, like, it's really hard to calculate, even if you have all of your sales pipeline set up to a T. And so having a way to calculate like all of your payments, all of your invoices logged, and doing it natively and easily, whether you're using an app like DealHub or some other solution, I could see app partners coming in and doing something like that where it solves a huge problem very easily. I
Right.
say easily, but I don't have to build it.
Exactly.
Right. If it was that easy, then it would
Yeah.
very quickly be added as a native feature. So there's
Right.
obviously some issue
But
there.
it's possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Whereas in the past, you had to have workarounds, and it was very, it was upon the company to build it, or
Right.
partners would go in and create custom code, or Danielle, you'd have to go in and create the object and create the workflows and create all these roundabout solutions. And now you can have app partners, again, like DealHub and other companies that come in and really automate a lot of the stuff that, again, could be done, but in a much more difficult way in the past. So I'm so excited for this.
I think it really helps with adoption too. Like I was saying, it fits into the data model in a way that everybody has already learned or will learn when they just onboard with HubSpot, because you have to understand how the pieces come together. So rather than having this external platform that maybe even if you did build a custom card for the center column that allows you to interact with that app within HubSpot, it's still just a window into that other app. It really doesn't pull anything into HubSpot. And so now being able to extend that app into HubSpot in a way that is like reportable and usable and works the same as what's already there, I feel like that learning curve just disappears with so many integration partners, because now you just drop it in and everybody already knows how to use it.
It's
so cool.
There were a lot of announcements at Inbound. Breeze was an exciting one, but admittedly, there were a lot more nuanced changes and releases that got me really excited, because something like artificial intelligence is huge for, I think, incremental efficiency. Help me analyze this, help me create a trigger quicker and easier, but it doesn't necessarily unlock new functionality. And oftentimes, I
Right.
think new functionality, new features, those are the things that a lot of times, as the developers in the account, hey, I couldn't do this and now I can. And so that's why a lot of these edits for custom objects are so exciting. And I know that we don't have anyone officially on the HubSpot team here, but if you had to imagine where custom objects are going, we mentioned the library earlier in the episode, and we'll talk about that in a second. But in my mind, they're going to continue to make the out of the box experience larger through, again, the usage of this library. Where do you see custom objects continuing to grow from where we stand today?
Yeah, it's funny because the more it grows and the more that HubSpot builds, the less you can even call them custom objects. They're just new objects. And so I hope and think that custom objects will continue to just be this kind of open-ended playground that we can go build things and really make sure that especially when we're at the enterprise level, we're creating an experience that is custom to our business and serving our business and the processes we have. So I don't think that the button in your settings that says custom objects is really going to change all that much. We might see ways where they get implemented or get different levels of visibility, reporting, who knows how it'll get implemented there. We might get new ways to report on things. So I could see a roadmap of exciting developments for custom objects specifically. I think what you're talking about, Cameron, when HubSpot is building these new objects is that instead of being handed a HubSpot portal that's sort of the standard practice, you just have everything, you have your company's contacts and deals as soon as you get in there. Now there's one more step to get onboarded at an absolute baseline where it's select the objects that are relevant to your business. And then you're stepping into a portal that is 20% customized to your business. Even if you're not going to have an enterprise subscription, you still have a lot that you can do to customize the function of the platform more or less out of the box, because you can just check off the things that are relevant to you. And now you have that as part of your experience, and you can start to build your processes from day one on those objects that will really serve you.
And I mentioned the library previously, but I believe it's specifically 3 objects that have recently been released as, shall we say, new standard objects: real estate, I think, healthcare, and education. And I almost don't even know if it's right to call those as objects, because like real estate as an object, I know then I believe, select buildings or properties within real estate. And I think those are technically the objects. I still need to dig into it, but I'm curious if you've looked into it, or if you're familiar with the library that's been released thus far.
Yeah, I'm trying to pull it up on my second screen because I was looking at this last night. The objects that are there, I'm gonna make sure I get a full list here. So it's still in beta. So I had to go opt into it. It's public beta, so it's very easy to get set up, and then it takes a few minutes to appear in your account. And I actually asked Breeze how to get it, which was really funny. I said, "Where can I find the new object library?" And it did not tell me that it was in beta, but it did tell me to go to my settings and it would be right under data management, which it was once I got into the beta and gave it a few minutes to update and refresh. But the new things that are in there are appointments, courses, listings, and services.
Yeah.
And that's in addition to,
Kyle mentioned that I had a somewhat failed live stream before the event. Kyle mentioned that courses was a new object, and it was really exciting.
I heard about that. There was some chatter, I think it was in Sprocketeer, about someone trying to build a courses object like through the API. And they were like, why am I getting an error when I type in courses? Turns out it was because they were building it. Thank you.
Yeah, it was released, maybe beta, I don't know, like the day before inbound.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I wonder
It's an
what
exciting
happens if you
development.
already have a courses object to enable courses.
They're going to steal it from you.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know.
Uh,
That's a good question.
Conspiracy theories aside, so I mentioned real estate, healthcare, education, and previously I had some uncertainty about those being objects. And that would be accurate because those are not objects, those are templates. And then
Yes.
the objects exist within those templates. You can choose education, and then courses would be the object within the education template. So
Mhm.
there are many objects available within those 3 core templates. I expect we'll see more templates and more objects available soon.
Definitely. I think we're seeing a lot more of that templating thing happening because we got is it in workflows where you can save actions and reuse them across workflows, which is really helpful. So bundling things together to help users be more efficient. And whether that's from day one or once you get into it and you're building workflows over and over again, which I'm sure we all have lots of thoughts and feelings on building lots of workflows. But still, I think it's creating this experience that makes it a lot easier to just build things and keep going. And that's really where all the tools that have come together as Breeze and all the ways that HubSpot is using AI throughout the platform, all of those new things that are coming into play are really just to make our lives easier, to simplify things, to take some of that brainless work away from the people who have brains and want to use them.
Yeah. I think reading the tea leaves a little bit, it seems like this is the HubSpot's first attempt maybe at verticalizing. So if you go to Salesforce's homepage, they have different landing pages for if you're a restaurant, if you're in this industry, that industry, right? So they want to create this unique experience per industry. It seems like this is HubSpot's first foray into doing that. there was also a lot of talk about partners, that they really want partners who are specific to certain industries. So I feel like that's all tied together.
I'm glad to hear that even though I'm hearing consulting information and HubSpot information, it's like those two worlds are converging in their advice, because in the consulting world, everyone tells you like niche down, get really good at one thing. And in the HubSpot world, they're like, we're niching down and we want people who are good at one thing. And it's really nice to know that we all will have jobs 5 years from now, unless AI takes over.
Yeah, exactly.
I think there's two key implications to the continued investment in custom objects. One is it's very clearly a play at appealing to enterprise and larger companies, because this is something that naturally any larger company is going to be just wanting and needing. But making these new, shall we say, standard objects, I foresee it continuing to open new levels of analytics. So whereas, for example, you might have to go in the past and create your own courses object and then create custom reporting and then piecemeal things together, I foresee a future where you have all of these wider arrays of standard objects and native reporting, native analytics, and other native features to those. I even totally see Breeze playing into it and being able to very easily at some point look across multiple objects, piece all these pieces of information together, and really give you a true holistic view of your CRM as that continues to get smarter too. I think that's where we're headed.
Yeah, it's exciting. I also was just scrolling through the object library page and was reminded that there are new standard objects that are not part of that library. Orders and carts were recently announced. And that I know my friend Chris Carolyn is very excited about those.
He has been a long-standing champion of orders and carts, and I know he's been shouting it from the rooftop. So I'm excited that it's finally here, because I know there's so many companies and so many users who benefit from having that. And I know he definitely was an early pioneer of pushing to make that a reality.
Yeah.
For companies that are looking at creating custom objects, I know we said it depends as far as should you use it. There's the concept of MISI, mutually exclusive, and oh wow, I'm drawing a blank on like the most basic point when it comes to setting up custom objects. But you want to make sure that the custom objects don't have any overlap. What is it?
I've never heard this acronym that you're trying to work out.
Oh, MISI. Oh, now I'm gonna pull it up because I'm of course drawing a blank. It's like the most basic framework.
We'll let you Google that. But I think you're exactly right once we get the clarity on the acronym, and that
mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive.
Okay.
So you want to make sure that one custom object is unique and independent of the other one. A contact is a contact. It can't be a company, right? A building is a building. It can't be an organization. And so making sure that when you're creating it, you want it to be the information of that object, you want to be exclusive to that object and exhaustive of the information that could be in other objects. Yeah. So that's a framework, but what are some rules of thumb for companies that are thinking about setting up an object? Is it just anything I want, I shall have? Or is there,
I think
a strategic
there need to be a lot of conversations, but not a lot. I don't want to make it sound like this unattainable world that we should aspire to, but I do think that when you are debating adding anything to your tech stack, whether that's another platform that you're integrating or even just a new property, to really give it some thought around what purpose is this trying to serve? How does this fit into our business process? And why are we even considering this? And so that's where you get to the collectively exhaustive side of that framework, to make sure that you have everything in place for this to be the solution that makes the most sense. This is why companies do RFPs. Like, you need to understand what are all of the options here to make sure that this is the best one. And you don't have to spin your wheels for months on that. But I think just taking a step back, checking in with some internal stakeholders to say, why are we looking at this? If it's something like, I had one client who created a custom object called parent companies. And I was like, this feels like a really bad idea. And I understood their frustration with it. They we're limited in their visibility. When you have parent-child relationships between companies, it's difficult to manage those associations at scale. It's difficult to report on them in different ways. But at the end of the day, I was like, we should basically honor the company object that's there because of the way that it functions in all of the other pieces of HubSpot. So when we want to look at tying things together and we'll build things to serve your needs, of course, but it doesn't need to be a custom object. It could be properties and views and reports that still get us to the same solution. And I think you don't have to be too precious with custom objects because you do have, I forget how many you get, but
And I think they may have increased it too.
Yeah.
I feel like I walked past something where they said they were increasing it. So
I vaguely remember hearing
10
that
at
too.
one point,
It was 10.
but I feel like it might have been that was before the increase, so I'm not sure what it is now, but perhaps we shall pull it up.
Yeah, get back to the Googling. I feel like I haven't seen very many accounts that have more than 5. And usually if they even have that many, it's 3 that play together or 3 to 5 that play together and serve one function. I know of Event Happily, the example that I heard talking about the app objects was Max on his and Kyle's Monday morning show. And they were saying Event Happily drops in 5 custom objects, and maybe you don't even need all of them, but they've only been able to sell to enterprise HubSpot platform portals that have the headroom to have 5. And so the app objects means that they don't have to worry about that. But even if you get that many objects and they're all labeled that way, they're still all serving a specific need that HubSpot currently doesn't have, in that it's like speakers and sessions and sponsors and things like that you might want to label, that you would want to measure outside of what HubSpot's functionality does with companies. And I'm sure you could do event management on a really low scale way if you're not actually producing events. I just worked on this for a client of mine yesterday, where I mocked up an event engagement object, where they have different ways. If you have a booth, even you could have a demo, you could have an on-site meeting, you could have a session at an event that people are attending and you get a list out of that. And you need to record all of those interactions in a way that the HubSpot platform doesn't really allow for, but you still need to measure it. You still need to push it into other places like Salesforce and really understand how all those pieces play together to impact your pipeline. In that example, the solution was really just what they were doing currently was uploading a whole bunch of lists. Their poor marketing manager would come home from an event and sit there for 2 hours and upload individual lists and then edit their scoring and their workflows to include those individual lists. And when I heard her talk me through that, I was like, we're not doing that anymore. You guys have marketing enterprise. Let's do something a little bit more streamlined here. But to get to that point where you decide this should be an object, in scoping that project, I even sat down and wrote, these are the tasks that we would need to complete to roll out this object before we even build anything. Like, we need to have the workflow, we need to have the documentation, we need to have all of the properties set, we need to have the link mapped over to Salesforce. Like, we need to have all these pieces in place for this to actually be rolled out and usable. So just creating a custom object doesn't get you very far. You really need to think about how that would fit into the rest of your business processes so that you're making use of it in an intelligent way.
Now, someone had asked in one of the comments during our stream here, why do businesses even need custom objects? Don't they just add more noise? So I know that my take is they can add more noise and it might not be necessary. But if you look at the examples that we've been talking about thus far, not every company only relies on tracking information on contacts, companies, deals, and the basics of the basics. Danielle, you just mentioned the example of Event Happily. If you want to track and you run events and you want to track all of the data tied to that event, you have an event object, you have speakers, there's all of these other pieces of information that come together. Because if you are a company that runs events, you want to know more than just information about contacts who might be attending it, companies that are tied to attendees, deals that could be revenue coming in. There's a whole lot more information that you may want to capture. Custom objects, if you don't have those conversations and map out the use case, and you don't make sure you understand how all the data flows together, it definitely will add more noise to your instance. But if you are tracking more than just the core necessities, then you certainly should use custom objects or the new native objects that are being released.
Yeah, I completely agree. I have seen many cases where they just add noise or they just add confusion. And I think in those cases, it's usually because RevOps was building things in a closet. Like they didn't really talk to anybody or really think about the downstream effect of who needed to interact with these new things that we're building. And when you've got any kind of operations function, the idea is that you are operating the company, like you are operating services. And so making sure that all of the touch points that come together make sense and can work off of this new thing that you're adding should be like step zero for every new thing that you're considering. And that's definitely what I do in my consulting. Usually I get called in because everything's a mess and they don't know what's happening. And so I come in and I'm like, everything's a mess because nobody talked to each other. So now we're going to sit down and talk to each other and figure this out. And that is like the very first engagement with me. Once you sign the contract, we are scheduling an hour-long workshop with your senior leaders to just air your grievances, basically, but to understand how these pieces should fit together or where the biggest blind spots are and where the biggest room for improvement is to really dictate the rest of our project together. But those meetings are really fun. There's a lot of complaining when you start peeling back the layers.
The airing of grievances, it's like Festivus. You're familiar with.
Give them 5 minutes and sticky notes and they just go nuts.
Here's a question that ties into custom objects where I know a lot of companies that use some other CRM project management tool, some other software outside of HubSpot. Maybe it was before they ever started using HubSpot. Maybe it's for reasons outside of things that might be tied directly to revenue. And oftentimes I get asked, can we just replicate this in the CRM? Can we build ClickUp into HubSpot? Can we build what we have in Monday.com in HubSpot? And I'm curious to hear your take on that because my answer is probably, but it's not as simple as let's just make a projects object and we're done.
Mhm.
So what's your take on that?
Yeah, it's a tough one to answer because I want everything to live in HubSpot. I want everything to be connected and make sense and whatever. But I also recognize that there are a lot of specialized tools that can do it better. And now the question is, it used to be, do we build it in-house or do we buy? And now the question is, do we build it in-house? You could build from nothing and have your devs build you an internal tool that maybe even lives inside of HubSpot, or do you build it in HubSpot? Or do you have an external tool? Because HubSpot has become so flexible, and if so much of your business is already running inside of HubSpot, sometimes it does make sense to build out that custom object. But I think you have to let HubSpot still be what it wants to be to some extent. Like I'm not going to try and turn HubSpot into a project management tool. Just does not make a whole lot of sense for me, at least. And I can't think of any clients that it would make sense for. But again, I work in B2B SaaS. I recognize that I have only seen a very small piece of the portals that could be on HubSpot. But I know even for myself, HubSpot has notes on contacts and companies, and HubSpot has playbooks that I could potentially use. But when I'm sitting down with a client and have a check-in meeting, I'm taking notes somewhere else. And I might copy and paste that into HubSpot, but I know that I like Notion because I can create different things while I'm typing. So I can create a table, I can drag things around, I can drop a link in, I can add another page, I can very quickly change the formatting of the text. And so that's my preferred tool for that. And even if I get some of that information back into HubSpot, I still want that tool to do what it's meant to do. And I want HubSpot to do what it's meant to do, which is to, in my case, track my pipeline. So I think there are definitely cases where you should not build in HubSpot, but that's where coming back to step zero of your conversation and how is this going to serve our business? What needs are we meeting and what goal would we have? You run your mini RFP process of what do we need this process to accomplish? What do we need our tools to accomplish for us in order to serve that process? And then you can evaluate, do we build in HubSpot? Do we build from scratch? Do we find a new tool? Do we partner? Do we hire? Whatever it is that serves the best outcome of that process is the way that you should build it.
I think it's important to reiterate the statement that HubSpot is not everything for everyone. It can be as much as you want it to be. Can you build it into becoming a project management tool? You probably can. But the question then becomes, at what cost? What are we not doing because we're taking ClickUp and rebuilding it into HubSpot? And again, can you do it? Functionally, you probably can. But is your time better served doing that or building pipelines and setting up your revenue infrastructure and such? And so that would be my take.
Yeah, all these things are just very robust and flexible databases, right? The objects, properties, they're just a visual representation of that. So yes, he could do it. but why would you want to? It's going to be too much work and not as much functionality.
Exactly. And it can be as much as it needs to be, but it doesn't need to be every single thing for every single person. Maybe we revisit this recording a decade from now and HubSpot is built out so much that statement is obsolete. But my opinion is it's a CRM and it should be just that. And you can build it to be very robust, very functional. It can hold a lot of data and it can be very flexible. But if there's another program that does something better, it's important to remember that HubSpot is built to be an all on one platform, not an all in one platform. It doesn't
I have
every
a
single tool in the
curveball
mix.
question for the audience here, or just the two folks on the call right now. Given HubSpot's kind of shift away from that initial focus of being a marketing tool, and so much now is on all the hubs and the CRM being the core of it, do they change the name of the event? Is inbound still the right name for it?
Is all bound already taken? We know that's already becoming popular. I don't see them ever changing their name. I do
No.
think that we're already
Okay,
seeing the
event.
notion of hubs starting to get phased out. We have workspaces that is now very much a thing.
Right. I
You
meant,
have the
will the
shift.
yearly conference still be called inbound, since that's so tied to marketing?
I'm still coming in to inbound, so why not? I agree with you. They built their brand on this concept of inbound that's like kind of, dare I say, not really a thing anymore, especially with,
It's all about the flywheel.
yeah, it's the flywheel, it's AI, like it just isn't there anymore. And so the fact that the conference is even still named that, I feel like it's just legacy at this point. So maybe they could rename it, but I think they'd be losing a lot in sort of the culture of what they've created inbound to be if they were just like, yeah, not real anymore. Let's choose something else.
It was just something that was, it was just bouncing around my head like the whole
It's a
time I
good
was
shower
there.
thought.
Yeah, but it was more
For
like
sure.
a week-long inbound thought while I was there. I was like, it seems really strange to still have this name. It just doesn't align with what the focus is. So, anyways, that's my hot take for
And
the week.
and even if the name remains as homage, I do think it speaks to an important point, which is the way that businesses are run. It continues to evolve. They started on the notion of inbound, which at the time was a very big concept, like the concept of creating outgoing marketing messages that brought customers in and then being able to build a company on incoming customers. That was huge. And we
Yeah.
know that now that still has a role to play in companies and companies that master inbound marketing. I don't want to say they outperform or grow better than companies that don't, but I don't think there's anybody that's going to argue that inbound marketing or inbound contacts and leads is a bad thing for a business if they can really master that. If anything, maybe it just becomes more exclusive. That would be my hot take.
It has been selling out.
And it's
And now we
moving to
all,
San Francisco.
I know. I'm
That's it.
Boston based, so I am very sad about the San
Not,
Francisco move. But they did say it's coming back to Boston in 2026. So yeah.
That's
just
it.
1 year
Inbound
to
is continuing.
to take it to
Continuing to grow.
Salesforce's backyard just one time and then move back to Boston.
Just like a little poke.
We're going for a sucker punch.
Yeah.
As always, HubSpot continues to grow and do new things, and it will be interesting to see how the notion of custom objects continues to age as we continue to get more standard objects.
And as
But
we
Danielle,
continue
thank
to
you so
age.
much for definitely. Thank you for bringing your expertise to our episode today, Mark. Always love when we get to do these. For those who are watching who aren't familiar, again, we're all members of the Sprocketeer community, so you can find all three of us active in the forums. Sprocketeer is the largest independent community of HubSpot admin, HubSpot users. There's over 2,000 members in our Slack. There will be links to join in the show notes. So if you're not active in Sprocketeer, but you are a fan of using HubSpot or you are interested in using it for your business, join Sprocketeer. We've got, again, all different channels and people just helping one another to use the platform and make it better. Also, make sure you check out our friends, Deanna Gloff, Kyle Jepson. They run the HubSpot Admin Hug, the HubSpot user group for HubSpot Admin. That is every Tuesday at 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, and they never miss a beat. So make sure you check that out. And then finally, do check out previous episodes on YouTube and Spotify if you enjoyed the episode today. Thank you, everyone. Sprocket